Now that we know enough about the bats that we'd like to monitor, and we know where we want to monitor our bats, there's another video online that we've made where we're showing you in detail how to actually configure the SM4 bat detector. You can set these detectors up. Yeah, you have to set the time right, and you can set the location, and then you can program it to start at the appropriate time in the evening and switch off automatically at the appropriate time in the morning, so that it just records at the right time, saving batteries, and that it records for bats. So that's all covered in a different video. In this video, we're going to actually go give you some pointers and go into detail on how to deploy the detector in the field and what you need to consider. Before that, we do that, I want to just quickly mention that this is not the only bat detector out there. This is the one that we chose to focus on. It's one that's widely used by a lot of people, but there are plenty of other brands and models of this brand and other brands available. For example, there's the Echometer Touch that comes in a regular version and a pro version. It's basically this little red microphone, and you just plug it into your phone or your tablet, and it turns your phone or tablet into a bat detector. And the cool thing with those is that you can actually see live what you're recording. You might actually be able to identify the bat species on the spot. Something that the SM4 bat detector cannot do. You need to download the data to your computer, run it through software before you can analyze these data. That means that the SM4 bat detector, which is actually waterproof, is really great for stationary monitoring, where you leave your detector out in the field for a while. The Echometer Touch isn't great for that, but the Echometer Touch can be used for driving transects. But it's also really great for outreach and education. If you're taking a group of people out to a little pond at night and you have an Echometer Touch, or other brands have similar devices, and you can actually record a bat, it also gives you audio feedback. So it basically makes a particular sound. It converts the sound of a bat into something we can hear. So people get really excited, and I personally still get very excited every time we record a bat with this, because you can just get information about it all at the same time. So you don't have to be restricted to just using the SM4 bat detector, but for the purposes of this program, we're only really going into detail on these detectors, as you can see in our video on how to configure these bat detectors. The SM4 bat detector can be equipped with different microphones. We're mostly going to focus on the SMMU2 microphone. This is the most modern one at the time of recording. But the SMMU1 microphone is a totally fine microphone as well. So what are the differences between them? Well, the U1 we consider to be an omnidirectional microphone. And you don't have to fully understand this diagram, but basically if the microphone is in the middle and it's pointing here, it records the sounds of multiple frequencies basically all the way around it. The best to the front and to the side, but even to the back, it records sounds there. The U2 microphone we consider to be hemidirectional, which means it records pretty well to the sides, to the front, not as well to the back. But it's definitely not a lesser microphone than the U1. Actually, the U2 is waterproof and the U1 isn't. So the U2 is kind of ideal that way. Now with the U1, you can attach this microphone horn to it, and that makes this omnidirectional microphone a directional microphone. And here you can see that it does record sounds best that are coming straight from the front and not so much from the side and hardly from the back. So there's a purpose to that. We kind of recommend the omnidirectional and the hemidirectional microphones. So yes, we'll mostly be talking about the U2 hemidirectional microphone. So for field deployment, there are a couple of things that you need to consider that are very important. And all of these things are important because we want to increase or have as high quality recording of bat calls as possible. Because the lower the quality of the recording is, the harder it's going to be to actually determine what species you're dealing with. So all of these tips and kind of requirements are there to increase the chances of you getting high quality recordings. So first of all, you want to make sure that your microphone is at least 1.4, about 1.5 meters off the ground. Um, if you are at eye level or if you are reaching above your head, for most people, that means you'll be high enough. You don't need to use a measuring stick, but just use common sense when mounting your microphone. The reason is that sounds bounce off of different surfaces, and the ground is just this big flat surface that sound bounces off of. So if you're too close to the ground, you're going to get a lot of noise, or not noise, but reflection and echoes of your actual recordings coming into the microphone that are just noise on your screen and make it harder to figure out what is a bad call and what isn't. So put it off the ground and you won't have to worry about that. Similarly, sound will bounce off of and create all this disturbance in your recording if your microphone is facing and too close to some other surface, either a wall or a bunch of trees, that all creates this bouncing effect of sound that makes it harder to identify bats. So the recommendation is to the direction that you're pointing your microphone in, that there is nothing there for 3 or ideally even 5 meters. So a forest clearing is ideal, as you can see in these photos. If you're using the U1 microphone, as I mentioned, they're not completely waterproof. Water could run into the tip of the microphone here. So you have to mount it so that it points about 45 degrees down. Then any rain that falls on it here is all fine at the connectors, but it'll just run down and run off of the microphone. With the U2 microphone that is waterproof, you can just mount it horizontal. So that's that flat surface with the logo on it, have that pointing horizontally. We don't want this to point up because water will collect on the flat surface, and now you have a barrier of water between the microphone and the bats that you're trying to record, and it might not actually pick up the bats. So horizontal for the U2 microphone is best. Here are a couple of examples of what really excellent microphone setups look like. If you have the opportunity to mount it on a pole like this might be 4 or 5 meters off the ground. This is great. You're far enough from the ground that you're likely not going to get any reflection, especially at water. Water reflects sound really well. You want to be high off the ground. And also, it's not too high. You don't want to go 20, 30 meters off the ground because most of our bats aren't flying at that height. So this, like 4 or 5 meters off the ground, is perfect. But if you can't do that, just keep that minimum of 1.4 meters off the ground in mind. Here is another one. As you can see, the microphone is pointed towards the open area. All the clutter, all the trees are behind it. It's also mounted on a pole so that it sticks out above all the clutter of branches and stuff. So that's a great setup as well. Here too, there's this dead tree. The pole is mounted right next to it. This is probably 3 or 4 meters high, and the microphone is pointed away from the tree, presumably at more open area, so that there's at least 5 meters of open area before there are any trees, walls, or other obstacles there. Now, once you've mounted your microphone and you've set your detector ideally at the base of the pole or a base of a tree, and we also recommend that you lock it to a tree or a pole because it is expensive equipment. You're not done yet. You've switched your detector on, it's all good, it's ready to go, but it's good practice to collect some other data. If you can and you have a handheld GPS, take the latitude and the longitude, record the locations. Also estimate roughly the height of your microphone. And if you have a compass, otherwise you can guess or estimate. Take note of the direction that your microphone is pointed in. All of this is important because you might not be the person who is putting this detector out next year, or you're like me and you have a bad memory and you don't know exactly where you put your detector or how high you put your microphone or which direction you point it in. And for consistent monitoring, it's important to get these things as similar as possible every year that you monitor. So record these things. It's also good practice to record the detector model number, an identifier, similar for the microphone number. and your SD memory card have an identifier on those as well. If there's turns out when you collect your data that there's anything wrong with it, these information might help you to narrow down whether it's a detector issue, a microphone issue, or a memory card issue, and then you know that they need to be sent for repair. It's also good to take some notes on habitat type, whether this is in a deciduous forest, a coniferous forest, or over a pond, just so that when you're back in your lab and you start to analyze these data, maybe 6 months after you collected it and you can't remember anymore which site this was, these are just things that help you figure out where your data was collected, as well as deployment dates. It's embedded in the file codes as well once you record these files, but it's just good practice to record when you put your detectors out and when you collected them. In our extensive acoustic guide, there you'll find more information on things to record. Now, also just some brief notes when you're doing mobile transects, because it's a little bit different, whether you're using the U1 or the U2 microphone. In this case, we want you to point the microphone up because we want you to record bets that are basically that you're passing under when you're driving your car. It's also important that you have to maintain as much as possible a consistent speed of 32 kilometers an hour. So you have to select, when you're designing your driving transect, you have to select secondary and tertiary roads. Don't go driving on a highway where other cars fly by at 110 kilometers an hour. That's just not safe. So go to the back roads. The transect also should be at least 25 kilometers long and no longer than 48 kilometers. So when you're selecting your grid cell, and it's important for you to do mobile transects, make sure that you scout out the area and make sure that there is a good road transect of at least 25 and at most 48 kilometers that you can drive there. It's also important when you design your route that your route doesn't cross back on itself. Mobile transects are counting on that you only visit each site once, because otherwise if a bat is circling around and you pass that bat several times, you might assume that it's a different bat every time. And so you can't do that. So you can't do any route crossbacks. And a little bit similar to the stationary surveys, you want to avoid like additional noise as much as possible on your recordings. So if you're entering a road that has a closed forest canopy over it, make sure that the canopy is at least about 3 meters above your vehicle. So with your vehicle probably already being about 1.5 meters, the forest canopy cover should be at about 4.5 meters from the ground. Again, this is just to avoid getting too much sound from bats reflecting off, or even sound from the car on the road reflecting back and forth and basically just causing all this noise in your files. So that's about the design of your route. Now, when you have your route designed and you want to conduct the survey, you should pick a night where there's low wind speeds, ideally of 10 kilometers per hour or less. And there's got to be warm temperatures of above 10 degrees Celsius, because otherwise bats are not very likely to fly. NA-BET recommends that you start your survey 45 minutes after sunset. We actually would recommend that you don't start it until 75 minutes after sunset. Tessa McBurney has studied this actually, and it seems, at least on Prince Edward Island, and presumably in much of Atlantic Canada, 75 minutes after sunset seems to work better. We just found that 45 minutes after sunset, you just don't record any bats. This might be because the NA-BET protocol was really written with United States latitudes in mind. And here at northern latitudes, it just takes a little bit longer for it to get darker, and therefore it might take a little bit longer for bats to get going. As far as equipment goes, we recommend that you use omnidirectional or hemidirectional microphones. Here in the picture, you can see both omnidirectional and the directional. This was part of a study where we compared it, and we found that with the directional microphone, probably because bat populations are just so low at the moment in most of Atlantic Canada, we just didn't record any bats. And when we used the omnidirectional, we found that bats were nearby. They just weren't right over the car. So yeah, we do recommend the omnidirectional microphones. If you can, have a GPS device on you, either a handheld and have it track your track so that you can cross-reference at what time you were where, or if you have a plugin for the SM4 bat detector, you can use that. If you don't have a GPS, there's no worries. In a video, we're explaining what you can do to still figure out where you recorded your bats on your transect if you didn't use a GPS. So we're going to end this with another activity. I'm going to show you a couple of photos of a field setup, of stationary point survey setups. And it's for you to have a look at these photos and just decide briefly what would be good or bad about these setups. I will ask you that you ignore that these photos are taken in winter. That is not the appropriate time to monitor bats for any bat anyway. And on the landscape, you're unlikely to record any bats in Atlantic Canada in winter. So ignore the fact that there's snow on the ground, but just look at the actual setup of the microphone. So here is the first one. So here, if you remember, when you use the U2 microphone, the hemi-directional microphone, we recommend that you don't point it straight up. So again, this flat side here with the logo on it, that's the direction that it's pointed at. If it rains, water is going to collect on the microphone and you won't record any bats. So you want this to be pointed horizontal. Hard to see on this photo. This is probably roughly at 1.4 meters high. So it is the bare minimum if you can mount a microphone a little bit higher and horizontal. Let's move on to the next one. So in this picture, well, the problem is that the microphone isn't extending beyond the branches, it's actually hidden among the branches. So if your bat's flying here, the sound that the bat's emitting needs to pass through the branches to reach the microphone. Some of the sounds might reach the microphone, but a lot of it will be blocked. And that just, basically you're gonna miss a whole lot of your bats. If you're gonna mount your microphone on a tree, that's totally fine, but do it on a branch that has no leaves or needles on it. Extend it to the end of the branch so that it's the furthest thing sticking out, so that there's nothing between your bat and your microphone. And the third one. Now, some of the things might be a little hard to see on this photo, but there are quite a few things that you can note about this photo. The first thing really, and that's the part that might be hard to see, this microphone is mounted way too low. Now, if you might not be familiar with these bat detectors, so it's hard to estimate size, but this microphone is only about 1.5 feet off the ground. So that's not nearly high enough. You're gonna get way too much reflection of any sound recorded off the ground here. Secondly, this piece of duct tape on a flat wooden surface, this is not going to hold the microphone up for a whole week, especially if it gets cold, if it gets wet, this microphone is going to fall to the floor. So you want to make sure that you secure your microphone. Duct tape can work in some cases. Zip ties are usually better. You can mark other things that there's just a chaos of cable here. Just coil this cable. If it's going to be higher, you're going to need more of the cable, but whatever cable you're not using, just kind of secure it. It doesn't stand out as much. It's less likely that branches blowing in the wind will catch it and pull on it and unplug it from the detector potentially. Finally, too, I would recommend that you chain this detector to this pole, especially if this is on public land. This is actually along a trail. So if you're gonna, a trail that people walk every day, this is in plain sight. So you definitely want to protect your equipment from being stolen. Potentially even put a note on there saying what you're doing, bat monitoring in progress. If you have questions, please call this number. And then this one. So here, where I mentioned that your microphone, the direction it's pointing in, it should be pretty much clear empty land for 3 or ideally 5 meters. Well, here within only a couple meters, there's this little building that's going to cause a lot of echoing of your sound. So this, yeah, this is just not a great place to mount your microphone. And then the last one. So this setup is actually pretty okay. This is an example of a setup that's totally acceptable. Hard to see, but based on the angle of the camera, this is slightly above eye level. My eye level it would be, so that is more than 1.5 meters high. So that's fine. As you can see, the direction it's pointed at, it's open land. There's nothing within 5 meters of it. And you just have to make sure that you secure this microphone on this post, that you don't just use that piece of duct tape. Make sure that this microphone really can't fall off the pole. But yeah, this is an example of a pretty good setup. Higher, of course, is better, although don't go climbing these power poles. That's illegal. So just highest, what's high and practical and safe to do, and not in winter. So that was our section on actually deploying the SM4 bed detector in the field, and I hope that was helpful.